Welcome, everybody, to Job Search in the COVID era. My name is Leslie Warner. Some of you may have seen me around the office or met me. I work with Alumni Career Services at Tufts. Also with me somewhat in the background, but helping especially with Q&A is Nicole Anderson, our other team member with Alumni Career Services at Tufts. And just a little quick note about that. If you are a current student or a 2020 graduate, we're going to encourage you to reach out to Tufts Career Center staff for resume, interview, questions about your job search, networking, career assessment, any and all of the above. And for the summer, the 2020 grads will continue to work with undergrad career center staff. And then in the fall, you'll transition over, or if you have new needs, you'll work with Nicole or me. Everything from job search to thinking about graduate school to what the heck could I do or should I do, and we'll refer to some of those things moving forward. So again, welcome. Just a little brief introduction to me. I've been with Tufts Career Center working with alumni, including brand new grads, for a little over 15 years. Nicole Anderson has also been with the Career Center for over 15 years, working with students, working with alumni, young alums. And we bring a lot of expertise and ways to encourage and support you, and the Tufts resources are there to support you too. So we'll talk more about that. Quick housekeeping for today. The official presentation will go until 1:45. So we have a lot of material to cover. Some of the slides in the slide deck I'll skim over pretty quickly or even skip in the interest of time, but I'll also reference where you can pick up more details on that information or that topic, which is all there for you either in archived webinars or on the website, links, resources. And what I anticipate is that we're going to have a lot of great questions, and I want to respond to as many of the questions, live in this session as I can. And we may not be able to get to your specific question or answer it in the full detail in this time frame. If you do have a question, please type it into the chat. And if you move your cursor around either at the top or the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat, and it looks like a sort of cartoon bubble if you haven't used it before in Zoom. You can type to everyone, and that will be viewed by everyone on the call if they look at, on the webinar, if they look at their chat. Or you can type it specifically to one of the hosts. And what I'd encourage you to do if you want to just write to a host is write to Nicole Anderson, because I'm going to be busy focusing on the slides, the conversation, and Nicole's going to be helping feed me the questions. So chat either to everyone or to Nicole, please. And also, maybe you think of your question later, or maybe we don't get to the details of your question. If that's the case, you can email me as a follow-up, and I'll put my, maybe Nicole, you can put my email address into the chat for everyone so they can see it. And of course, you can always get it from the website as well. So again, welcome, and let's get started. Okay, make my screen move. There it is. Brief agenda: how the job search is and isn't different in the current COVID pandemic situation. How do you prepare for your job search? What I call the 4 main job search methods, which you'll see is a little bit simplified, but I think a helpful model. Tips for an effective search, and lots of resources. So how it is and isn't different? Well, the ways it's the same are you still need your strong resume, your customized cover letter, your interviewing skills to be able to tell your story, answer questions, practice, prepare, follow up. And we've always talked about the importance of networking, the importance of connecting with people in your industry or in the company you're interested in for feedback, for advice, for information. We've also always talked about, the need for self-care and pacing yourself, helping yourself get through what is a job search is a very challenging thing. So all of that is the same. The difference is it's all more so, meaning the self-care mindset, mindfulness, taking care of yourself part is even more important than it's been in the past. And we'll talk more about why. Of course, the uncertainty is part of it. The fact that your job search may take longer for some people could be a part of it. And then the building relationships through networking, through asking advice. Again, we've always stressed it, but it's more important than ever now. And we'll talk more in detail about why. Some other things that are different now is hiring patterns, have always been somewhat different in different industries, different job functions, job areas. But of course, when you just read the news or open up an article, there's huge variety now, even more variety. Some technology sectors and some other sectors are hiring very, very actively. Some other fields will have hiring freezes. What does that mean? It depends. How long is something frozen if it is? Are there ever exceptions? Yes, we don't know. So there's more uncertainty and there's more change, and the pace of change is fast. So again, part of why you need more self-care, mindfulness, and resilience is to manage how all of that uncertainty feels and to manage, not knowing how long things will take, which was always true. It's just more true now. And this part I put about visibility, being known and seen, that was always important. It's just increased in its importance. So job search support, very important. And many people in normal job search times say, oh, well, I got my resume looked at by someone at the Career Center, or I used the samples on the Career Center website. So I see some job ads, I can just job search by myself. And anyone can always try that. We submit that it's much more efficient if you get some good input early on and think about the support you need. It could be an appointment with a career counselor at the Career Center to look at your strategy or help you think about what to even focus on or apply for if you're not sure. You also want to set up systems to organize your space and your information for your search. And this can be challenging. Maybe you're sharing a space with a number of family members or roommates. Maybe you have, again, a sort of small or shared space, but as best as you can, have ways to keep your job search activity, information, and resources really organized so that it's easy for you to pick up and put down. Really, it's a big time waster and stress if you're always trying to find things or aren't sure where the information is. Another step that people often, again, even in normal times of job search, often forget is we have a sort of bias in our culture, right, to the rugged individual, I can do it myself. And maybe you've had past job searches for an internship or a job where you did do it pretty much by yourself. And well, that's great. It's just, I encourage you to this time think about who can be on deck for emotional support. Is it a friend? Is it a family member? For the days when you're having a hard day or you're feeling discouraged, the person that can make you laugh, the person that can remind you of what's great about you, what's special about you. And they may know nothing about the job search, and that's okay, but that emotional and confidence support is great. Tactical support is more like, it could be a former supervisor, or could be a professor, could be a career center person, somebody that, or a friend who's been through something before you, to give you advice about like how to do it, how to find that resource, how to follow up, how to find and connect with alumni for advice. Job search success team, I won't talk about in a lot of detail, but just to say a lot of research supports that when you have a peer or semi-peer who's also working on a tough goal, doesn't have to be a job search, but it can be helpful, and you meet, it could be one person, could be 2 or 3, and you meet once a week, in the olden days in person, now by phone or Zoom, and you really hold each other accountable, not just for working on the search, but for specific action items. Checking in, how did it go? What resources do you need to get it done? Great tool that can really help hold you accountable and keep you on track. Being your own project manager, right? This is another one that many, even experienced job seekers and professionals forget. They're busy, maybe you're working, maybe you also have home responsibilities and you're trying to squeeze in the job search. People often just try to sort of fit it in wherever they can, but when you are your own boss, you commit to a specific items to do, not just work on the search for 2 hours on Saturday morning, but what are the specific actions you're going to take then? How will you know when they're done? And then once a week to sit down and go, well, how did my plan go last week? What went well? What could I do differently or better? Where do I need more resource? It's okay to change your plan. Of course, things change, but you want to do it in a conscious way, just like you would with a job. So you be a firm but kind boss of yourself and reaching out honestly for support and information. So I've been talking in the last few months a lot more about resilience. And again, maybe you've had tough times in school or in life before. If you have, look back and review what helped you get through tough times before, even if it was a personal situation. Was it relying on friends? Was it discovering new tools through exercise or meditation? Specific kinds of support from friend or family member or professional. Think about what helped in the past, or if you can't think of ideas from your past, think about trying some of these new things, because resilience means, one definition, an ability to recover or bounce back from difficulty. And the truth about life is always going to present some difficulties to us, and we can't predict or know when or where they're going to come. I can predict for you that job search right now is, for most of us, going to be longer, and possibly, it definitely will have more ambiguity. And that needs constantly coming back to, how do I rebuild my confidence? How do I keep my focus? How do I keep my energy? And it isn't the just do it like the ad says, it's really looking for practices and actions that can help you do that. So anything that you've done in the past, whether it's exercise or meditation, I encourage you to draw from again or even more. But maybe your favorite form of exercise isn't available to you because the gym is closed or not accessible to you. Or maybe you didn't really need to focus so much on resilience in the past. Then I really strongly encourage you to try some of these things new. Or maybe you've always done exercise, but you've never done a mindfulness practice. I encourage you to check it out and try it, because the mindfulness things can be anything from 1 minute where you are doing some deep breathing, which we're going to do in a minute, to a 25-minute guided visualization that helps you relax and prepare for an interview or a networking meeting. Mindset, on the other hand, is literally, what are the thoughts you are thinking? Now, if we don't control or work with our mindset, a lot of the thoughts we think, right, we're human, are things like, what's going to happen? When are they going to get back to me? Why can't I do this? This is hard, right? A lot of negative self-talk. And it's not that it's not truthful, but it's not helpful to focus there. So we'll talk a little more about specific cognitive techniques. And some of you that have studied cognitive psychology, some of this may be familiar to you, but maybe you haven't, again, maybe you haven't needed to practice it so much for yourself. It's normal for new challenges to require new tools, new resources. So I'm going to talk a little about the power of mindset. And I realize I'm spending a lot of time on things that are not actually job searching yet. I promise you I will get to the job search, but this truly will help you keep your confidence, rebuild it when it feels knocked down, and give you some new tools and ideas. And a mindset is the difference between like the voice in your head saying, oh, this job market is terrible, there's nothing for me out there. A shift in mindset is when you tell yourself out loud, write it down in your mind, my target company, the place I would love to work, isn't hiring now or isn't hiring yet, right? Yet is a great word. I can connect with more people in this industry. I can learn about trends. I can ask about what skills I could be polishing or adding now. I can brainstorm with this person about other companies or other industries or other job functions, job titles I could target. And often, just one quick tip, adding yet to a sentence really helps. I don't have a contact at that company yet, for example. Or I don't have a contact at that company, what else could I do to connect with them, learn about them? Another quick example about mindset power is the difference between this is impossible and I've met challenges before. And like we talked about, how can those strategies that I used before help here? Whatever is happening now will change. I can promise you that. And take those mindfulness breaks early and often. We know from all kinds of research that trying to sit down at your computer for 4 hours to do a thing is just not the most efficient or effective for most of us. So, okay, before we get to prepare for your search, I want to take a literally 30-second mindfulness break right now, just to practice it. This is just going to be some breathing. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, close your eyes. Feel the chair that you're sitting on. If your feet are on the floor, feel your feet on the floor. Whatever your body is touching, a couch, the floor, your bed, feel it. Now we're going to take a deep breath in. I'll cue you when to do it on the count of 4. We'll hold it for 4, and then we'll breathe out for 4. And we're going to do that 3 times. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Now do the next 2 on your own count. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and breathe out for 4. So, if you're done, maybe you noticed some small changes in your body. What the research shows over and over is that that type of deep breathing, and if you're interested in these breathing techniques, you can look up on Google. There are different numbers of counts that different people try, but the idea of counting, slowing down the breath, a little bit of a hold, and then a slow out breath, it makes your blood pressure go down a little bit. It slows down your heart rate a little bit. And if you do it for a few minutes longer, the changes can be greater. So that's a quick one that, again, you can do anytime, anywhere, even before a job interview, right? Taking that quick mindfulness break. And the other type of break that's great to take when you're working on your job search is, of course, exercise. Taking a walk outside, dancing around your apartment, whatever form it can take for you. So preparing for your search, be sure that you're ready to answer the question, whether it's in a networking meeting or a job interview, what are you doing now or lately? Now, if you've recently graduated or recently finished your school year, obviously there isn't a huge amount of time that's elapsed, but it's still something to be thoughtful and ready to answer. As I say, selective honesty, meaning you don't necessarily have to tell them, how many Netflix shows you watched or how much you're doing various other things that may not be self-care or productive, but you can think about what type of honesty is good to share, what can show who you are as a person. Is it areas that you're researching, people that you're talking to, something new you're learning, those kinds of things. Self-assessment, again, it's good to take a pause. If you're very clear on your goal, great, write it down, know what your skills, I call them your assets, what do you bring to the employer are, what do you need, what are your interests. If you're not sure about some of these things, or maybe you have some ideas, but you're not sure how it translates into a specific job, check in with, make time with career center counselors. They can help you And they can also help with what I call the split screen, where on sort of one screen, you're doing self-assessment and thinking about longer range planning. And on the other screen, you're thinking about what can I be doing now to earn some money, either as a step towards my goal or as a survival job or way to bring income in. Another step in the preparation is researching, reading what trade and industry journals. Those are things like Boot and Shoe Journal or American Society of Training and Development Journal. They're magazines related to a specific profession or a specific industry. Professional association websites. You can access articles in library databases, and I double-checked with the Tisch librarians yesterday, and indeed there's a long list of, you don't have 100% access to everything Tisch has as a graduate if you have graduated, but you do have access to a long list of databases, many of which are full text articles, which are great ways to read about an industry or to read about a specific company to help you prepare for cover letters or interviews. Now, before we jump into the next stage, Nicole, are there questions that you think it would be good for me to touch on right now?
We do have some questions. One just came up, so let me open that one up and see. Someone is asking about best practices for effective networking, which I think you'll probably get to.
Yes, I will.
So I'll just read the question so that you can keep that in mind when you get to that point. When I finally get to an info interview, they rarely go anywhere, and it's difficult to keep in touch with people without specific questions or goals in mind. During school, my network was mainly faculty, whose own networks are limited to higher ed. Any advice helps.
Okay, great question. And I will talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. Anything else that seems relevant so far or helpful?
So let's see. Other questions that maybe we can address at the end that came in before the the program.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's helpful to start defining what we call your target job. Again, with the caveat that I know that some of you, if you're a brand new grad or if you're still a student, you may still be figuring these things out. You may not know exactly what type of company you're looking for, or even what industry, and industry, by the way, includes nonprofits, includes government. You may not be sure about which problems you would enjoy solving. You may not be sure which compensation and benefits are available to you. But I put this list up almost as a way to start thinking about it, because some of the things you will definitely need to be thinking about is which skills do you have? Which skills could you use, and how do those translate into jobs? And again, problems you might enjoy solving to the extent that you know those. The other things about culture and management style, you may have beginning ideas about them. Just be careful about making assumptions like all large companies are X. Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Large companies can have some positives like structured training programs. Sometimes they're more bureaucratic, which can mean slower to change. But again, be careful of blanket assumptions. But I put this list up to help you think. You want to be thinking about, what am I looking for in its best form that I can imagine, and then making thoughtful compromises, and at least to begin to think about these things. And these are also, some of them are things you can ask about in informational interviews. What is the company culture at that company? How would the alum describe it? What do they like best about the company? What problems are they working on, and how do they enjoy them? What problems would an entry-level person in X job be working on? Next, I talk about your target company or organization list, right? And again, if you're just getting started in this way of doing things, don't worry, this is something you're moving towards. Is if you only look at open jobs that are advertised today, that gives you a certain snapshot of what's available out there in the world. But if you think about it, it's like an iceberg. And if you're only looking at advertised jobs, that is literally the tip of the iceberg. And something like 70% of that iceberg is underwater. meaning the jobs aren't created yet, or they aren't advertised yet, or it may be that there's a company under that waterline that you don't know about, that you haven't heard about. So in addition to looking at open jobs, which we'll talk about later, we want you to start thinking about what organization or company could meet my criteria, could be working on a mission I care about, or in an industry I'm interested in, or in a location, or the other factors, right? And this is, again, this is something your career counselor at the Career Center can help you with if you haven't been thinking this way. But it's also a great question to ask in that informational interview meeting. What other companies should I be looking at if I'm interested in X, right? Here are 5 or 10 companies that I've already been researching or applying to. Which other ones should I be looking at? The library resources we talked about, especially articles, or public libraries can help you identify new companies to check out. Again, they may or may not be advertising right now. Public libraries also often have a searchable business or company database. You can call up and ask, or these days maybe it's by text or by email, but the librarians can let you know, do they have a searchable database? Because that's where you could say, again, let's say you want to work in the shoe industry. Well, you can look up in that database all the shoe industry companies that exist in a certain geography, or in a certain size, or, right? So those are great tools for identifying new companies. Another way to identify new companies is, of course, LinkedIn. The LinkedIn company research tool, I am not a huge fan of, but I love using advanced people search on LinkedIn and then using keywords to identify, companies that might be of interest and see where else people have worked. Again, if this is new to you, LinkedIn, we won't have time to cover in detail here. Lots of great resources on our website for LinkedIn and how to use it in a variety of ways. And we also have archived webinars specifically about LinkedIn. So I've kind of hinted at this. Why is the target company, target job, even if you're just beginning and just starting to think this way, why is it so important? We want you to start thinking this way because it shifts your paradigm, if you will. It shifts you to thinking proactively instead of just reacting to job ads. You're allowed to apply. We want you to look for job ads. We'll talk about how to do that, but we want you to also have some more chances of getting something that might fit you, that might be closer to your goals, your needs, and helps you make thoughtful compromises and trade-offs whenever it's necessary, which is often. Helps you focus your time and energy and effort. You need to start somewhere, right? So you might as well start with something you're interested in or care about. You are a one-person marketing and sales firm right now. You may not want to be, but if you're in a job search, you are trying to figure out what your product is, right? Your skills, the problems you can solve, what you offer to a company, and then figure out who needs that product, who might want that product, who might connect with it. So I don't mean that in a cheesy way, but more a sincere way. You have something to offer and someone else might be able to pay you for that thing or that set of energy. So the marketing documents, resume, and cover letter, I'm not going to talk about in detail here. We have lots of great resources on the website. We have, again, links and written resources and samples on our website that are great. And we also have webinars. Now, some of the webinars that are archived are focused on an alumni audience. And so some of the information in it may be talking about, 2-page resumes and people with more experience, but the core information is really the same. Communicating in a customized way, in a way that focuses on this company, this job, what their needs are right now. Needs meaning both what you learn in the job ad, but also what you may have learned through networking and talking to people and doing other research. JobScan is one resource, unless you know of a better one, Nicole, for putting your resume in and comparing it to a job ad. Is that
That would be the number one that I would say too.
Yeah, and what they use is their own version of the fancy algorithms that the employers use. So it can give you a quick check on, are the right keywords in your resume? You can, of course, do this manually by, printing out job ads and checking, highlighting, and picking out all the keywords and making sure that they are truthfully. We have to tell the truth in our resume, but, there's a difference between, a simple example is if I'm a second grade teacher, I'm going to use the word teach. If I'm doing adult training, the exact same function is called training, right? And they don't use the word teach in adult training resumes, at least not so much. So sometimes it's just figuring out what's the right language. And reading samples really helps. And I think the samples on our website are good. The samples, I find samples for cover letters, you can also get some inspiration from themuse.com. I have that website listed at the end. They have some really clever and interesting takes on cover letters, which can also help inspire you. You need to be appropriate for your industry, your sector. My favorite example of, and you want to speak in a personal voice, right, especially in the cover letter, but my favorite example of a personal voice that went a little too far was one young alum who had 5 exclamation points in her cover letter. She was extremely excited and enthusiastic, and it was for PR. So we agreed that for PR, maybe 1 exclamation point was going to be okay, appropriately placed after talking it over. In some other industries, you might feel 0 exclamation points, for finance or whatever, might feel more appropriate for the marketing presentations. That's when you're talking. You need to be able to introduce yourself in a thoughtful and helpful way. For networking, it's kind of, who am I? What am I best at? What do I want this person to know about me right now? For interviews, it's the tell me about yourself. Again, we have archived webinars on exactly these topics. The idea is to tell enough so that you are an actual person to them with some memorable information. That's what they need to know right now, but not every detail about everything, because that would take too long. So again, use us. Big Interview has great resources for practicing for different kinds of interview questions, including tell me about yourself, right, Nicole? Got the interview stories, again, challenge or problem action results, or situation or task action results. And guess what? If you're writing out your situations, actions, results in detail, you're going to condense that exact information down for maybe a resume bullet. But the slightly longer version can fit for an interview story. So some of these time-consuming things that you're doing to prepare really can serve different multiple purposes. And again, I can't stress enough that what have you been doing lately? That is going to be, I think, the #1 COVID interviewing question. And it's not like there's a right or a wrong, but you just want to be thoughtful. Now, preparing references, talk to your references about your strengths, possible weakness for specific jobs. Now, the job search methods, I'm not going to ask you or take a poll in the interest of time. But what I love is when I've had like a room full of 100 people, and I got to see this as an audience member once with an outside speaker, which was really interesting. How many people in this audience of 100 alumni of different ages found their last job by just responding to a job ad, online or wherever? And it was, maybe 15%, 20% of the hands went up. How many did a targeted mailing, which is basically when you apply to a company that is not advertising, but you apply for what you wish they were advertising, what you want to do for them, much smaller. Maybe it was 3 or 4%, but a few people. How many used a search firm, a recruiter, a headhunter, an outside recruiter, not inside the company? That was maybe 15% or so. I haven't been doing my math going along, but just to say, when they asked how many found their job opportunity through networking, a forest of hands went up all over the room. There was a literal gasp. People were like, oh, wow. Not to belabor the point, but again, if you've been reading articles or if you've been talking to a career center person before this, you know that, as Robin Kahn says in her office, networking is the key. And it can work in concert with either a published job ad or even with a recruiter. And we'll talk about how and why that works. And the reason I talk about percentage effectiveness, even if my math isn't perfect, is just to remind people, you know, the easiest thing to do sometimes is if there is an online job ad, I can quickly send out my resume and cover letter or apply through LinkedIn, which is another option. And that's pretty quick. On the other hand, they get many, many hundreds of jobs of those people who apply online. I can promise you they are not all qualified. I was on the other side for 5 years as an in-house recruiter in HR. Many people were way, way overqualified and required a much higher salary, and they put their salary requirements in when they applied. Other people did not have the required core competencies or skills. So many people are not qualified, but the company still needs to sort through all these applicants, either with an online system or with human beings or a combination. So yes, you're allowed to apply to jobs. We encourage you to look on Handshake regularly, Art Sciences and Engineering, School of the Museum of Fine Arts, but also look for both LinkedIn job ads, Indeed, and if there's something related to your specific industry or function, look there. You don't have to have 100% of the job skills, but 60, 70%, definitely the core ones. And you don't want to spend all your time on that because, and again, we talked about the customized letter, looking for ways to stand out or be connected to the hiring manager. That hopefully can involve finding an alum or maybe a second degree connection, someone who knows someone who you know, to introduce you to either the hiring manager or to someone in the right department, or to flag your resume for an internal system as an employee referral. Any and all of those things can really help. Targeted mailing, I'm not going to spend more time on in the interest of time. Again, if it's appropriate for you, work with your counselor to devise a cover letter for the job you wish they were advertising. This is what you use primarily if you can't get in the door through networking. It's a small organization, you can't find a Tufts alum or other contact. You can still write to them and tell them what you'd like to do for them. And it does not have, it has a greater than zero effectiveness. So recruiters, search firms, and headhunters. In the current economy, for a new grad or a recent grad, it may not be anything that will be effective for you. They may not be interested in you. But if you have technical or in-demand skills, it's certainly worth checking out. Are they a resource? Could they be helpful as one part of your search? The other way to think about these firms is some of them have a division that focuses on temporary or contract hiring. And temporary jobs can be anything from a job in your field that is what you want to be doing. It just may be for a temporary, shorter period of time. Or it might be a survival or an in-between job to bring some income in. And so again, how much in between or temporary job or administrative temp jobs are out there, or a tech temp job? It depends. Just check and see who's out there and what is being offered. It could be a resource for you, but it may not be. Now, the networking, as I've hinted at before with that iceberg metaphor, which I did not make up, most of the job needs out there are not advertised yet. Some of them never. And I know that can be a little disconcerting if you're thinking about bureaucratic or traditional hiring processes where companies are posting on Handshake. Great. You want to know about those, but by having a conversation with someone inside the company before the job is posted or advertised, right? You have a good chance of having some helpful feedback, or having a person on the inside who can help you get your resume to the right person when that job does open up. Or they can tell you, well, we're having a hiring freeze right now, but check back in a month. Or we're not hiring for your role right now, but check with these other people or this other company. It also gives you good practice telling your story and answering questions, even though it's a little bit different situation, a little more open-ended. We can talk about ways to interview. Now, I do have, there are webinars that you can watch from the Alumni Career Services webinar channel about networking. And the one that I have archived focuses a lot on networking at events. Guess what? Conferences, professional events, some of them are still happening, right? Some of them are transitioned to a Zoom or an online format, which I know is frustrating. It's a little harder to just casually chat with the person next to you in a session, but you still get the attendee list. You still get some information, you know, from the speakers and from the Q&A. It still has opportunities for connecting, learning, and networking. Informational interviews, those one-on-one conversations, we have a great resource called The Herd, which has several thousand alumni in it who have volunteered. They are specifically stepping up. I would like to give advice and talk to students and other alums about my career field, my career trajectory, grad school, whatever it is that they've experienced. So check with The Herd first. You can find the link on our website. Also, the networking group on LinkedIn. Again, we've encouraged people to be open to informational interviews by joining that group. You can message people for free inside the group, but you search for them out on LinkedIn, bigger LinkedIn. The messaging for free is really helpful, those of you that know about LinkedIn, but you can also search broader LinkedIn and look for Tufts alumni and ask them on LinkedIn if they'd be open to a brief conversation. You're looking for their advice about X, 300 characters. Tufts Online Community is a great resource. I mentioned it before because it's a firewall for getting those library resources. It has every alum in it, and the students too. Their emails are only in there if they have physically put them in. So if you haven't joined already, join, and then you get access to the alumni emails that are in there. My quick networking tip, if you can't find the alum, they don't answer on LinkedIn, do not take it personally. People are busy. Maybe they're not watching their, even if they want to help students and alums, maybe they're not watching their LinkedIn messages. If you can't find an accurate email in the Tufts Online community, you use something called hunter.io. Can you put that in the chat, Nicole? And hunter.io is an email finder. If you put in the URL, tufts.edu, it tells you the email protocol for the organization, and then you can make a guess. So that's a quick tip. Use a career counselor for help with how to navigate that. But I wanted to answer the question about how do you make information interviewing effective? You know, part of it is honing your ability to ask the questions that will be really helpful to you. And sometimes, even if you're asking great questions, the answers are disappointing, right? They may not have a job lead for you, or they may not think of a person to introduce you to, or they may give you, if you've already had some meetings and done some research, you may be hearing the same information in a repeated form, right? And that can be disappointing, but they can still, if it's a place that is connected to places you might want to work, or it itself is a place you might want to work, you're right that you do want to stay in touch. Quick thoughts on how to stay in touch is you can literally Google for an article, how to stay in touch with networking contacts in a helpful way. Yes, if you have news or updates, that's a helpful thing. For example, let's say they did give you 1 or 2 pieces of advice. You can do a follow-up email saying, I read the book that you recommended, thank you. Here's what was useful. Or I checked out that conference you mentioned. Thank you. Here's what I learned about it. Even if the resource didn't take you exactly where you want to go, you can find a way to thank them for it. And they may hit reply and give you another resource or another idea. You can look for, I know we're coming to the end of our time, but perhaps there's a Tufts event. Olden days and in the future, you'll be able to say, I'm planning to go to this New York Tufts alumni event. Will you be attending as well? It would be nice to reconnect there, right? You can tell them about, don't assume that people know everything about Tufts alumni events or professional events in their targeted field. People are so busy that even if everything is crossing their desk, they may not have registered it. So telling them about a conference, a professional event, a Tufts event, that might be of interest. That can be a helpful follow-up. There's also what I call the non-obvious article. This takes some work because you don't want it to be an article about their industry that was in the Wall Street Journal last week or in their main professional journal, this month, because that probably is on their radar screen. But if it's from a little bit in the past or looking at their industry through another industry lens or some other resource, again, you can brainstorm with friends or a career center counselor about what specific things. And if you find a really good targeted article or resource, then you look at your spreadsheet of your networking contacts that you've been keeping, and maybe you can send it to more than one of them as a follow-up, right? It does take work and thought, I agree with you, and it isn't always easy, but those are some quick tips. Any other, I know we're at the end of our time officially, but Nicole, are there other questions I should take a crack at now?
So we have questions, that came in before the webinar, and I'll read some of these that I think that you didn't cover, but you did cover most of them. How long is too long of a gap between graduating and finding a job?
Okay, what a wonderful question. I always love this. And the honest truth is, even pre-pandemic, the honest answer is people have gaps for all different reasons, from not being sure what their goal is, to health issues, to family issues, to burnout. I was burned out from working so hard at Tufts and I needed a break, and then it was hard to get my momentum. All kinds of physical, mental, social, you can name it, issues. The issue there's no amount of time that's too long. It's just when it goes beyond a few months, it gets more challenging to tell your story, right? And your story is going to involve, as I said, what are you doing in the meantime? What are you learning? What are you teaching yourself? What are you, and in terms of skill building and teaching yourself, definitely check for, you do a Google for something like free courses in blank. Lots of resources out there are doing free courses now, some because of COVID, some as kind of a bait getting you in the door, 30 days free for Coursera, or Coursera has other free resources, I know. And some you can teach yourself. For example, this won't take you 6 months to learn, but if you were like me and graduating with an English major, having never taken a quantitative course in the universe, I took things like physics for poets, and I don't recommend this, but then I needed to do things like upgrade my Excel skills from basic to intermediate. So you sort of want to see, for example, with Excel and PowerPoint, for example, you want to know what's customary in your industry or niche, what's needed. Obviously, if you're in finance or analytics, you need much more advanced Excel and statistical skills. So the blessing is, in this time period, people understand that it will take you longer. Employers will totally get that it might take more months, more weeks, more months. Again, every search is different. Every situation is different. I had a professional musician I was working with, a recent grad, whose symphony shut down, and within 6 weeks, she had a job as a COVID tracer in a state that she wasn't living in. So this seemed very unlikely to me, but no, Massachusetts, they're really focused on hiring. And yeah, they are hiring COVID tracers in a lot of states. Many states want you to be knowledgeable about the geography and resources of that state, but there were some surprising things that happened, but it can take longer. Employers understand that, but they do want to hear your story. What are you doing? Are you volunteering in your community in, a non-contact or safe way? Are you, and by the way, the volunteering, and maybe we're going over time, but I'm a huge fan of what I call, the two different kinds of volunteering. One kind is you love animals and you take dogs at the shelter out for walks, or you foster them for socialization. And it's not related to your career goal, but it makes you happy and it's contributing to the world. Great. Another type of volunteering is what I call strategic volunteering, like my young recent grad who is volunteering with progressive political work in his local area, and he's targeting a national campaign that he would love to do data analytics for. but he hasn't exactly done data analytics before, but he's taken all the quantitative courses that I never took. So he's working on it. And in his case, he's also broadening his search to include many other progressive campaigns besides his dream boat one. And he's broadening beyond just data analytics to look at, is he going to be an organizer? Is he going to be a digital organizer? Is he going to be communications? Is it field organizing? And he's willing to compromise on job title and job responsibilities. And he's also starting to branch out beyond campaigns and look at nonprofits working on voter registration, voter access, voter issues, civic engagement. So he still has his eyes on his prize, and he knows he can be working on those data analytics skills and even building a portfolio on his own or by taking a course. So that's my quick inspiration for saying it's okay for it to take time, but you do want to think about how you're using that time, and it doesn't all have to be like I am working. It can be volunteering, it can be learning. So those are some of the suggestions. Anything you'd like to add, Nicole? Or
well, actually, I want to try to address a couple of more questions that were asked. Are companies still looking for interns? What are some temporary or summer jobs that might be available at this time?
Oh, wonderful question. And thank you for raising it. The meta, bigger level of that is you can literally Google who's hiring in Massachusetts or companies that are hiring now. And you can then change that search and say, Google search companies that are hiring interns now. You can go to Handshake, and there are definitely, right? I haven't looked at it today, but there are definitely organizations in a range of fields.
And I'll let me contribute to that, to this, Leslie, that I was looking at the internships lately, and it's interesting how, you know, COVID has affected, you know, the job market, and I was pleasantly surprised to see internships in publishing and authors looking for help with their websites because the publishing companies cannot help the authors support their own websites. That's something that was dropped. So it is an interesting, you know, churn in, you know, certain, that is happening in certain industries. Usually publishing, working directly with authors is highly sought after. And I saw a handful of those in the Handshake database. As well, we have an initiative going on called Jumbos for Jumbos, which is alums who have identified virtual projects for students this summer. There are, I think we had about 40 different alums step up. Now, most of the deadlines for those have gone by, but I know that there are some deadlines that are still open. And so those are shorter term projects, research, you know, there are things in marketing. So do check Handshake and check it often.
And Nicole is raising a really good point too, that, for example, I know of one young new grad who happens to be an econ major. Again, he has some technical and some potentially in-demand skills. So he found internship opportunities in like finance and business companies in Connecticut, in New York. He doesn't want to move there. He doesn't have to move there. So it is a weird sort of silver lining. There are additional opportunities that you can qualify for and apply for because they're designed to be remote, at least for the summer. So great question. And you can also, again, if you Google, you know, if again, Googling organizations that are looking for interns, you'll find some articles and lists, as well as looking at specific job sites using those search terms. And the other, I don't want to underestimate too, again, if you're out there, as we suggest, one by one, you know, a few a week, depending on your time and energy and what's available, talking to alumni in companies that you're interested in or curious about or want to know more about, you know, even if it's a PhD public health person and you know you don't have a PhD in public health and maybe you couldn't exactly work for them, they may know of a project or a person to refer you to for anything from research to, as Nicole says, remote marketing, and don't underestimate your digital skills. Even if you're not highly quantitative, you know how to put things on social media and edit them and make them effective, whether it's for your club or your community group.
And we did see we have a special section of the of the website, the Career Center website, as well as the Alumni Career Services website, that has resources for right now, resources during COVID. And one of the newer resources that was developed, I think it's called like COVID internships, not internships about COVID, but internships during this time. They're all remote. And I was looking at that search engine with a young alum a couple of weeks ago, and we found some fantastic internships, and she was actually questioning whether they were real, and we went through them, and they are real, and they're all remote. So some things have sprung up during this time, and so that would be something you could find on the COVID resources section of both the student website, but also the Alumni Career Services website.
Thanks, Nicole.
Another question, while we maybe still have some time, are employers changing their employment cycles for COVID-19? And, I'm interested, another one is, I'm overall interested in learning more about how COVID-19 will affect future job openings and opportunities.
Yeah, okay, the cycles one I can address. It is such an it depends question. One thing that we're seeing is, some employers are sticking to the same structured cycle if they are a highly structured, apply in September and start work a year later, or, the following summer. Some of them are sticking to that exact framework, but what is not clear is whether it's going to be in person or remote. And that's one of the uncertainties that people are dealing with that I'm talking to. Should I move there? Do I have to move there? I'm just saying, you have to see what the employer says and know that whatever their plan is for on-site services or being in that city, the plan may change. So I certainly wouldn't encourage anyone to move somewhere assuming that it's automatically going to be all in person, all opened up. And so that was the question about the cycles. Oh, and how it's going to impact long-term? Well, it depends who you ask. And, the economists who study these things, what they studied was, 2009, 2010, and 2002 was a little bit smaller downturn that affected the tech industry. 1991 was or whatever, 1990, whatever was another one. They do see impact, but I'm always cautious and encouraging. I don't encourage people necessarily to read those broad economist articles. And the reason is, unless you are an economist and that's one of the things you want to study, because it's telling you the overall statistical picture, which on the one hand can be reassuring in the sense, oh, it's not just me personally. I'm not taking a while to get my footing because of my personal lacks or whatever. So that's reassuring to know that it's a broad impact. On the other hand, you are still an individual. So yes, it will take people longer. What I think is helpful, and we have some on the website already, Nicole, to have people who lived through and survived and thrived through 2009, 2010.
There's actually going to be a panel coming up next month, surviving the recession or surviving a recession, because we have a couple of alums, both from 2001, the .com, and then the 2008 recession. So that should be a good one.
Yeah, and the shorthand for what you learn there is that sometimes your first job or your job that gets affected by the economic times is affected. It may be slightly different than you planned, but that you can move into what you want later on. In other words, it can be in one place affected by the economic times and then develop and grow to more where you want it to be. Does that make sense for sort of bottom line? Like my young friend who's the professional musician. No, I doubt she's going to switch fields to public health, but she's earning money, she's learning something, she's contributing, and so it's a setback for her, but hopefully short term.
A related question, Leslie, is have interview cycles been affected by COVID? And you and I have definitely seen this with our alums. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because there maybe has been sort of more time injected into a process, which allows you to maybe get further along in interviews with other organizations.
Could be. It can be. It also can give you more time to reach out to former employees. Former employees are an awesome resource for honest feedback about a company and their culture. Current employees are good too. But if you think about it, sometimes people feel more free to speak more broadly about a company culture and their experiences after they've left, so it gives you more time to have those conversations, more time. It can be frustrating. I will say the one big frustration I'm hearing from people is, wait, they said they wanted to interview me and now it's radio silence. Well, honestly, in the last few weeks, that radio silence could be anything from they're coping with the current social, political climate and concerns that employees are raising about their own company, and they're trying to respond thoughtfully to that. It could be economic questions. Where is our budget for next year? You definitely you keep, the mantra is don't take it personally, stay in touch, but keep that pipeline moving of other opportunities. Don't be a serial monogamy job searcher of one at a time, if possible.
We do have several more questions that are coming in live, but also from prior to the workshop. I'm going to pick a few since it's 2:01, and we also still have 40 people on, so on the webinar, so I think they're interested. Here's a good one. What are our thoughts on creative and unconventional resumes? And I think that, in this time, some people get desperate, or they want to, sort of, how can I get noticed?
Mix it up. Oh my God, what a wonderful question. And it's such an, it depends. Honestly, if you are in a field, whether it's your job function like marketing, or the company, like it's a creative culture, creative company in some way, go for it. However, do check it out with a trusted feedback advisor person, just to make sure you're within the realm of what's going to connect, what's going to communicate with this audience. Who you don't just want to think, how can I show how creative and wonderful I am, but how can I communicate with this person or with this audience, right? So definitely in a creative industry or creative function, what can you do? Can it be visual? Can it have music? Can it be multimedia? If it has all those parts and pieces, is it going to be easy for them to take in and read or view, or it is not going to require too many clicks or any downloads? You have to be careful about making it simple. But the other cautionary tale is making sure it, again, connects with your audience appropriately. So I would say, on the simple level, sometimes looking at your formatting and seeing, do I want to use a more of a, visual type format resume as opposed to just text? Check it out, see what other people in your industry are doing. It's okay to be, creative and outside of the box, but if you're too far out of the box, they either won't see it at all because it won't fit how they view things, either technically or, that's what I would think. What do you think, Nicole?
No, I agree with you. I think try to check in with people in the field. Mm-hmm. It seems like, again, I think you have to be careful about letting desperation sort of get in the way of common sense. And it does depend by there are fields that, mm-hmm. I think want something that's aesthetically pleasing or more or prettier or, mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I go back to substance and I go back to the details because mm-hmm. A lot of times people will say, well, I'll put those details in my cover letter. And while we are strong advocates of cover letters all the time, we also know that some people don't read cover letters, or cover letters get removed from the package, and what gets circulated about you is your resume. So the resume needs to sort of be the have everything on it as much as possible.
It has to have the important story.
Yeah.
I have a quick since I know we're running out of time, but a quick old story that I think is very directly relevant, especially if you don't have the relevant industry experience, but you have solutions to offer, ideas to offer, some other way of approaching it, either as a user or a customer, or this was years ago in the DVD era. So translate the technology, okay? But this guy, he loved video games. He had no experience in the industry officially, except as a player. And he did have experience with marketing and strategic marketing and product marketing in other industries. He put together a gorgeous DVD package, multimedia, about him, but in the framework of that industry, his features, his upgrades, I'm not using the right lingo, but It was so witty, it was so clever, and it was quick, but it was detailed and substantive. And it said, I can do this for you. And it got him interviews. It did get him interviews, and it did, but it also, he also needed to do a lot of networking to really, build relationships in the industry. But this was another way for him to show, I can do this job, because look how I did it, showing my, marketing myself as a product to you. So again, you have to upgrade the technology, and again, it has to be appropriate. But
let me ask another question, Leslie. This is a good one, and it goes back to when we were talking about gaps on the resume. Mm-hmm. It says there are a lot of personal things that can cause gaps in the resume. How do you manage networking while in the middle of something like that, especially if the external factor takes up a lot of time or energy?
Oh, what a great question. And it's such an, it depends. So for example, if it's something like, I've been on a career break with several small children, and now I'm very focused on if it's something that is neutral or comfortable to mention to people, perfectly fine. On the other hand, often it might be a family member's illness, or maybe multiple family members with challenges, might be your own personal challenges. I would say it depends how long the gap is, right? If it's just a few months, you may not even need a cover story, and you may not need the truth in there anywhere if you prefer not to share it, and you can talk about what you've been learning, what you've been focusing on. Is there a career pivot happening? Or maybe you share a simplified version. That's where you're working with a career counselor to craft a specific message that has what I call the sort of kernel of truth, or a bit of truth in it, but that you're comfortable with, and that doesn't get into gory details or distract. Sometimes the personal situation is, well, for example, I had one client who had been on an Olympic team for a sport that's very fun and interesting, but people don't know a lot about it. They either know it a lot or they know nothing. And we talked about how, her leadership role and the skills she gained fundraising for her team and doing various things were really key, but she didn't want to get sidetracked into a lot of Olympics talk, right? Or boat talk or whatever. That's not, if that wasn't what was relevant. So sometimes even if you're comfortable sharing it, it still takes some shaping and thoughtfulness to make sure you keep the conversation focused on. So I realize I didn't completely answer it, except to say it's normal to have to craft what we call a public statement for those situations, which means the version of your situation that has a little truth in it, but that is appropriate for the business world outside of your family and close friends. Anything you want to add, Nicole? Or
no, I think that's the advice I would have given. And yeah, I think it's important to know that if you want to talk to Leslie or me or any of the other career advisors, that's the perfect kind of thing to to ask advice about.
So there's not just one answer that fits every situation.
It's a case by case. I think the last question, well, we did have a lot of other questions, but here's a really good one. How do we know if we're making progress on our job search?
I love it. Yeah. And that is so important. And some of it you can evaluate yourself. Are you finding appropriate jobs that you think are in the ballpark? That's 70%-ish qualified to apply for, and you're getting the applications out. That's progress. Are you getting some interviews? Cautionary there. If you're not getting interviews, it may not be the fault of your materials or your experience, but then you look at, am I building in time each week for these strategic targeted networking conversations? Strategic meaning they're in the target companies that you would like to work in, or adjacent, or somebody like a recruiter that could be a good, recruiters won't usually have time to talk to you unless you're, someone that's going to earn them money. That's how they get paid. But if they're a Tufts grad, quite likely they'll give you a little bit of time for advice, feedback. So are you getting those networking meetings? Are you using them strategically and thoughtfully? Are you following up in a thoughtful way? Are you identifying new resources like professional meetings, conferences, groups? Oh, I forgot to mention meetup.com. Good old Meetup. I used to think it was like bike riding and hiking and knitting, and it is all those things, but it's also epigenetics and biotech meetups. There are some that are very specific, like the epigenetics one in Boston, and there are others that are more broad kind of industry, or there are groups that meet for startups or innovation. So those are the questions I would ask. Look, sort of an audit, a self-audit of what's happening. If you're getting interviews, but you're not getting jobs, again, time for a check-in with a career coach, a mock interview. Sometimes it's just a numbers factor. If you've had 3 interviews, you just might not have been the one that gets picked. But sometimes we can all do things to improve our interviewing skills. So great question. If you're, and I have occasionally had people who were doing all of those things, the groups, the networking, all of the things, and they weren't making the progress they wanted to. And, you know, eventually he got there. We don't know exactly why it took the amount of time that it took, but there, in the beginning, he definitely, the first 2 or 3 months of his search, every time we talked, I know we added more things and shifted his strategy. You know, for example, we used to do a list with our e-news of hot jobs. And he would, every week, he would find 1 or 2 of the hot jobs that he liked and he would apply for. And he wasn't looking at the rest of Handshake. You know, it sounds obvious, but he was so validated by, oh, there's a job here to apply for. It didn't occur to him to look more widely, even in Handshake. So we helped over time. He got more and more effective. He got better and better with the networking and advice. And yes, he was sometimes frustrated, like I've talked to 40 people and I don't have a job yet. He did get there. So that's a long way of saying you can do a self-audit to see if progress is occurring in getting meetings, getting interviews, having networking meetings, but you can also check in with a career counselor to look for ways to tweak or improve. Make sense?
So let's see. We still have 40 people on, so I'm going to ask a couple of other questions, Leslie, and really try to take advantage. Yeah.
And guess what, guys? This is also going to be archived and recorded, so you can review it later, as well as other resources. And if there are questions we don't have time for, I'll respond by email. So.
Here's a couple of questions that are somewhat related, or I think we can answer them together. Which companies have a relationship with Tufts? And then there's another, what companies are hiring for human factors engineering? So I think with the first one, it's, you know, any company that we have a relationship with is listed in Handshake. You know, so they're posting jobs, they're posting internships, they're doing events with us. They might maybe haven't posted a job or an internship first. And just sort of a reminder, or maybe most don't know this, is that lots of those companies are actually Tufts alums. There are hundreds of Tufts alums that are looking to hire Tufts alums and students, and they're driving that hiring effort. I think the question about which companies are hiring for human factors engineers specifically, well, if you are a current student, you should be meeting with Robin Kahn, who is our career advisor who works with students in the School of Engineering, and she can help you generate a list of target employers, both companies that already have a relationship with Tufts, but also companies that don't necessarily have a relationship, because that's the job search. It's creating a target list of employers. Leslie, I'll let you go on and add to both of those.
Yeah, that's excellent. And of course, going right onto Handshake and setting up for email alerts based on what you're interested in, what you're looking for. That's true for anyone. And again, some of the, as Nicole said, some of those employers are having events where they may or may not be advertising for you right now. But sometimes they're holding events because they anticipate future openings, or maybe they have an opening, you know, in a different department, but not in human factors. Still a good event to attend if you can. The other, again, I love LinkedIn for this kind of research. You go to you put in Tufts for the school, if you want to look for alumni, and then you put in human factors as a keyword, for example. And that's one way to find people who went to Tufts, did some human factors, and are doing something on LinkedIn. You know, again, there are ways to refine it more. It's not going to tell you exactly about jobs. You take extra steps to do that, but it gives you a sense of the people at some of the companies. Now, what's interesting is some people doing human factors work didn't major in it. right? And so, you know, you don't, just be careful. Don't only search by major when you're on LinkedIn. But that's another great, and Ryan can help you operationalize that.
Yeah, and or if you're an alum, this person can meet with either Leslie or me. So here's our last one, our last question, and this is probably from an alum. How can I and should I attempt to switch careers during this pandemic? Are employers merciful if you have taken time off? I took a sabbatical this year and now I'm finding it difficult finding work. So I think we've had this from a lot of alums, Leslie, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
So
people have taken some time off, and sometimes intentionally. I need a reset, I have burnout, or I have personal issues to attend to, whatever the reasons are. They consciously chose to take a step back, and then the pandemic hit. So are employers merciful? Well, I would encourage you to remove personal language like that. These are businesses. Mercy isn't really how they're thinking. What they're looking at is, who can solve my problem? Who can get this work done? Who can produce this deliverable? Who can work on this goal or mission or issue, right? And if you're the person that can do those things, so sometimes a career shift, if you think of it as almost like a square where same job, same industry is up in one corner of the square, and totally different job function, totally different industry is at the other corner of the square. That big switch generally takes longer, takes more work, takes more networking to show your worth, build that portfolio, show examples of what you can do, build relationships. However, there are always exceptions. So for example, if the area you wanted to switch into had something to do with any of the companies that are booming in this current moment, there's Zoom, and then there's all the companies that are trying to compete with Zoom, right, for work at home. Even as we don't know, there's still going to be people working at home a year from now. Will it be fewer? Yes, but that trend is going to continue. We know because of the cost of office rents in expensive cities. So if you want to shift towards an industry that's in high demand, maybe it won't be as hard. You still need to prove that you can do what they need done right away or very quickly. And that might mean, again, learning what the needs are, doing some skill building or course taking or portfolio building of your own. But if you're not sure exactly what's out there in some of the areas you're interested in, that's when having more of those networking conversations, feedback, advice, attending the conferences, that will really help you build a picture of, you know, what's happening. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, for example, who are really interested in data analytics. And they come from everything from, I had a computer science minor to I was an English major, and to like my young friend who's kind of in between that with a technical major, but not comp sci specifically. So that's a high demand area. On the other hand, how many courses you need or how much work you need to do to prove what you can do in that area, it will really depend on where you're starting from. So that's a long way of saying, yes, you can make a shift. But I would say general rule of thumb is that most people's job searches are going to take more time and more energy than they have in the past. And the exceptions to that will be if you have a highly in-demand skill that's in a growing area. But even then, you still need to prove that you can do it and show you can do it. Do you have anything to add, Nicole? Or
no, I thought that was great. Mm-hmm. I think we will close the webinar, or we'll sort of finish now. It's about 2:20, and did you want to do some closing remarks about resources or?
I do. Thank you for reminding. I do have just a reminder to use all different job search methods that are appropriate for you, and be sure you allocate your time and energy according to the effectiveness of the method, which is why we stress the networking and relationship building and visibility. Also wanted to mention, beyond LinkedIn, think about what other platforms you would find people in your target companies or industry on. Is it Twitter? Is it other platforms? And ways to be professionally engaged and active there. You can find great articles and resources on that. These are some books that I like. I'm an old school librarian's daughter. Websites are excellent. Articles are excellent. I have some, these resources have, like the Muse and others, have very good articles for a shorter take. Mindfulness, I wanted to include some of the teachers I personally have found helpful and interesting. These are places to start if you're new to meditation and mindfulness, and you want to look for someone whose wisdom speaks to you, but also their voice. If you're listening to their live voice, it has to be pleasant for you, right? And I love greatergood.berkeley.edu. They are positive psychology resources, research-based, but on all different topics, from parenting to working to a couple of apps. Again, free yoga classes. You can find all kinds of free resources on YouTube. I just thought I'd mention Adrienne. A lot of people have experienced her. And again, just to reiterate that all the ways that you've done things in the past, draw on those and just know that this, a longer search or a challenging time that's full of uncertainty, you're going to need some new resources, new ways of taking care of yourself and calming yourself, and taking productive breaks that are useful and help you get back into the game. Thank you for joining us.
And I'll say to all the new grads, or even rising seniors, recent grads, you know, if this is your first job search, then you know, you're in for something that is especially challenging. But if you can get through this, then you'll be able to face any job search, you know, in the future. So not that that's a silver lining, but you'll definitely be ready for the next job search. And you want to be thinking about that. You know, you always sort of want to be thinking ahead to that, not just to the current job, but what that current job is going to do for the next job, right?
Yeah. This is just one step in the journey, and believe me, you're going to learn skills and resources now that are going to serve you lifelong.
Yes.
You really are.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep. And if you want to catch the recording, it will be available on the Career Center website, on our YouTube playlist. So, all right, take care.
Take care. Breathe deeply. Bye-bye.